Welcome back to another Vue.js video where we learn Vue.js the hard way. And with the hard way, I mean by actually reading the documentation, sort of page by page by page. And in this video, we're simply going to talk about the reactivity system, the sort of observing system, the fact that you can tell Vue.js to observe a property, or actually you're not even telling them to observe a property. You're saying that in this template I want to display this particular property, and then you just update that property in your, let's say, data object, like in your store, and whenever you update that object, the view essentially, right? Like the template is updated, or the value in the rendered view is updated. So whatever is shown in the browser is updated whenever you change the underlying data, the underlying model data. So it's sort of an observer pattern, right? Where the view that's being displayed, like the rendered view, is observing the underlying data, and whenever you change the underlying data, the view is updated. So in the last video, I was pointing out that I was a bit confused around how they can actually manage to do that. Like if you look here at the left side, where like I'm wondering how they can actually do that when we say something like app.message equals, for example, foobar, right? Like how can they manage to observe that, since we're not saying something like app.set the variable message to the value foobar, right? Because then we would call the method or the function set that they've defined, so hence they would have a place of putting that, like observer logic. But actually, so somebody with the username of AMR commented on the last video, so thank you very much for that comment, that they're probably using the setter syntax from like plain JavaScript. So I jumped over here to the documentation just to see this. So it says that the set syntax binds an object property to a function to be called when there is an attempt to set that property, right? So it's like so JavaScript actually has get set. I'm not sure how long they've actually had this. So browser compatibility. Well, I'm way too zoomed in for no, actually, sorry. Yeah. So it seems to be like compatible everywhere, but like maybe not from or I mean from IE 9 and above. So yeah, it's not been around like a super long time, but like a fairly long time it's been around. But anyways, so this is set, and then there's a corresponding getter as well. Maybe we can I just change the URL to get here and hope. Yeah, okay, so the description of getter is that the get syntax binds an object property to a function that will be called when that property is looked up. And that's all fine and dandy, right? So like this is like getters and setters from any language that you might be familiar with. So then you can sort of trivially see how they've managed to set up this sort of reactivity thing, where it's like whenever you construct your initial view, I guess. I think they call it view instance, so maybe I should stop saying view, right? But whenever you construct a view instance like this and you pass something in here as the data object, then that data object, like every property of that data object, they construct a setter and a getter pair for, right? Because that also explains why we are able to say app.message rather than app.data.message, right? Because they're not actually exposing data, but they're exposing a setter called message. So since you've passed in some data and we've specified that we want to have a key called message, then they construct a setter called message, and they construct a getter, of course, right? Because we could actually, of course, let's do this. We could say console log app.message, right? So sorry, wait, now I just jumped into it, but let's give some context. So what I want to do is I want to dive into this reactivity sort of in a bit more detail, because I think there are some interesting nuances when we start to think about how they've probably implemented this. But I mean, we won't go all the way down into how they've actually done it, but hopefully maybe we will do that later in this series. But anyways, let me just console log app.message here. Let me save this and say open, like this, sorry, open this file. I tried to open the JS file. Problems, okay. Oof. Sorry, now I opened Sublime. So what I meant to do was to go to the index.html file and open that. Apologies. Okay, so here we are at that page, right? And you notice how we jumped from the text hello Vue to foobar, and that's, I mean, from the last episode where we display this message on the text. I mean, so this is the same HTML that we had last time, and this is the same JavaScript that we had last time. So if you're jumping into this from this video, or I mean, if this is your first video in this series, please watch them as a consecutive series. It probably makes more sense. And if you don't want to, well, we simply have just this JS file, this and this index.html file. And the index.html file loads the JS file after it has loaded Vue.js, the Vue.js library. So we're printing this message here. And in the main JS file, we're essentially initially setting it to hello Vue and then updating the message to foobar later on. I mean, that's a bit silly. Let's just say updated hello Vue. So so we won't have to look at foobar all the time. So it starts with hello Vue and then it jumps to updated hello Vue. But okay, so we were console logging app.message. So let's look at the output there. Can I bring up? Yep. So here's the console. So I'm console logging app.message, and you can see we get, sorry, maybe that needs to be a bit bigger. Woof. Okay, so you get hello Vue here in the when we console log that. And of course, I guess if we do that, right, if we console log after we've set the message, it should be the new value. Let's see. Yeah, so first it's hello Vue and then it's updated hello Vue. Anyways, my point was that they've constructed getters for us as well as setters. Now, the interesting part in my mind is that when I started to think about this setter syntax in JavaScript, I thought, okay, that makes sense as long as you are setting, like you're replacing the old value with a new value. But if you're mutating the contents of the old value, can really JavaScript know that there's been a change, right? And actually the answer is no, but Vue can, right? And that's the interesting portion. But let's dive into that. So let's just do. Let me open up a file. I'll just call it temp.js. Because we'll do a bit of node there, right? Let's just say console log hello world. Sorry, let me just use these instead. Hello world. Save that and then map a keystroke to running this file through node. So if I run this file, you can see that we get hello world, right? So now we're just passing a JavaScript file through node. It has nothing to do with Vue or anything like that, right? The point I want to make is that I want to take a bit of their example here. And then we're going to look at sort of the, not necessarily the edge cases, but like, let's say the culprits of doing some kind of watch syntax like this, or using some kind of get set pattern, I guess, like this, right? So let's say that we have a variable, let's call it something like data, right? Or store. Let's just call it data, whatever. So we have a data object, and then we have a setter for that, where we can say, let's say set name, and then we pass in some name, and then we simply set some local variable to that name. Let's say is that n, and then we get we have a getter also for that, or that's also called name, and that of course takes no arguments, and then we simply return this underscore name, and then maybe let's initialize underscore name to I don't know, empty string, whoops, like that, so that it's not undefined. Okay, let's just make sure that this works, right? So can we then can we say, actually let's do it that way. So let's say console log data.name, and then we'll say data.name equals John Doe, and then we'll say console log data.name. Okay, so let's run that. Whoops. Okay, unexpected identity. Yeah, so sorry, I'm missing a comma here. Okay, let's run again. Okay, so actually let's clear the screen up because now that looks a bit messy. Let's run that. So we get an empty string here. So maybe empty string was a bad initial value. Let's say no name, right? Let's run again. We get first no name, and then we get John Doe. Okay, so it seems that our getter works because we can get the value out by simply asking for it, and our setter works because we can set it, right? And notice how we're actually using this we're using these getters and setters because we're not actually calling underscore name. We're calling name without an underscore, right? We're saying data.name. Now, that's all fine and dandy, right? And like you can observe this, and like you can be reactive. So maybe we should do it this way, right? We should say let's console log whenever we are resetting, right? So it's like updating name to, and then we'll just say n, So then I don't have to, let's not console log then, right? And then let's just run this. So we have a data object that has some private variable, like it's not actually private, but we can think about it as a private variable that's called _name. And then we have a setter that's called name, and we have a getter called name. And whenever we set the name, we also console log the message updating name to, and then whatever name we actually set it to. So if we run that, you can see that we get updating name to John Doe, right, as an output. And then let's do that again, and then let's say Jane Doe, and then let's console log in the end just data.name. So we're setting the name twice, first to John Doe, then to Jane Doe, and then we're just console logging. And then you can see, I mean, it's sort of reactive, right? Like our console log is the reaction, you can think of it sort of as like, I mean, here, this is the point where you would call the observers, right? If you think about, so maybe actually you've watched my videos on observer pattern, or maybe you're familiar with observer pattern. So this is like, I mean, the data here is the observable, but then here is like when we have a change to the name, we have a change to some piece of the observable that observers would presumably be interested in. So this is like where we call the observers, or where we notify the observers. We notify them of a change. So somewhere along those lines, or somewhere along these lines, is sort of how they've implemented it in Vue. But okay, so hopefully you can see how this sort of reactivity works. Now the issue here is that what if name was a more complex property? What if name is something like this? So what if we say data.name is first is John, so it's an object where we have a key called first that's pointing to the string John. Sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. And then we have another key called last that's pointing to the name Doe. And so, I mean, we can keep the same, yeah, we can keep everything the same in the data, right? But we're just changing the structure of the underlying data. Of course, I mean, if this was a statically typed language, we couldn't keep the structure here of the data, because we would have to change that to reflect this change that we've done now in the type that we're sending to name, because we've altered the idea of what it means to be a name. But again, like in dynamic languages, that's implicit rather than explicit, right? Like types are always implicit. You never actually explicitly specify them. So let's now, again, I can't type and talk, but so now we first, or let me write Jane here, right? So we have two lines here, right? Where first we set the name to this complex object where the key first is pointing to the name John and the key last is pointing to the name Doe. That's the first thing we do. And then the second thing we do is that we pass the key first, we set name again, we overwrite name to something else, and then we pass Jane as the first name and Doe as the last name. So this should all work, right? I mean, presumably, and it does. And you can probably see what you can probably figure out what we expect to get back, right? Because we expect to get updating name to, and then all of this stuff, and then updating name to, and then all of this stuff, right? It's like the two complex objects. And then in the end, we get the final one. So let's just run and see if we, yeah. So then you can see, okay, we get updating name to, first is John and last is Doe. And then updating name to, first is Jane and last is Doe. And then we get this final value back out. So still, that's all good. That's all good and fine. But the issue is that we're using the equals here on name, right? We're saying data.name equals. The tricky part is, what if we didn't do this? Like, let's remove the second one where we change the whole name from John Doe to Jane Doe, but we're like replacing the whole object. What if we instead mutated, right? What if we said data.name dot first equals Jane, right? Presumably that should be the same thing. Let's actually, if I just run this, right, and think about the last line here versus the last line here, we still have the same result. Like the end result is the same thing. It's first Jane, last Doe. But the reactivity, right? The notifications sent to the observers are different, because in the previous example we had two notifications, whereas now we only have a single notification. And this is sort of the limitation of this, the implementation of getSet in JavaScript. And I mean, I'm not claiming that they should have a different implementation, because it's probably non-trivial, right? Because you have to implement, or you have to make every way of mutating a piece of a data structure, like for any data structure, observable. And I have no idea whether that's easy, right? But I could just imagine that that's like non-trivial. And in some sense, this is kind of where we sort of, I guess, get to the core of different philosophies of, like, this is the thing that Vue does, but React completely, for example, React, right? But React completely avoids this problem. Well, maybe I'm actually mistaken. So I don't know enough about React. Let me say Redux at least. Redux completely avoids this problem by assuming immutability. So it assumes that you never mutate data because there is no good reason to mutate data. Or I mean, you could argue that there are good reasons to mutate data, but like the assumption is that you are not mutating data. The assumption is that simply like your whole application is pure, or actually not your whole application, but the points that Redux touches, all of these points are pure. But here you don't have the same assumption, right? So here you're allowed to mutate, but you need to be careful about what you're mutating and in what way you are mutating, right? But, okay, so this is the first thing that we can think of. And of course, arrays have the same problem, right? Like if you have an array and then you push more data into that array, which, I'm not going to show, right? But I think you can probably see how if we had a list of names, for example, and then we pushed into actually, let's just do this, right? Let's say set names, x's, and then we'll just say names, push, oh, sorry, not x's, we should push, no, sorry, it's not push, sorry, I'm so confused. Then we say, so we say this names is equal to x's. Okay, I actually don't even have to, sorry, sorry, it's actually the same problem. I'm always thinking about things in a sort of statically typed manner, which is why I'm thinking we have to change in this end, but because we're in a dynamic language, right, I can just make the assumption that name is actually a list of names rather than a single name, right? So actually, I mean, we could think about it in exactly the same way. What if we said something like that? What if we said data.name is equal to, and then we have an array of like all the names that individual owns, right? And then what if we, wait, I have a syntax error somewhere. Do I? No, maybe not. Okay. And then data, but then what if we then push something more, right? So what if we push, or we want to push like JD as the initials for John Doe. Now, of course, what we should get back here in the end when we console log the whole thing is John Doe JD, because we've pushed in JD to the name. We've mutated in the value JD into the array John Doe. But will the reactivity work? Probably not, right? So first we just get updating name to John Doe, but we're never getting updating name to John Doe JD because we mutated in that value. So in some sense, you can really think about it. I mean, the simplest way to think about this is really that we have an observer, or we have a setter and getter for some property. But if the value that we store when calling that property has properties, then we are not observing those properties. We don't, like, the setters don't, let's say, cascade, right? It's not like we're observing so we are observing the outermost value, but we are not observing values that value have. Anyways. So yeah, that's probably the best way of thinking about it. It's like when we replace the whole value, that's fine, but when we replace parts of the value by calling methods that are exposed, that value exposes, right? Because I mean, if you think about it, it's like, yeah, I mean, it depends on how you look at it. But if we go back to this scenario where we had like an object, right? Then first here, when we say data.name.first, in some sense, first is a setter on the object name. So in order for this to also be observed, or like in order to be able to be reactive to this, then we need to have a setter on the property first of the thing that we already have a setter on, which is name, right? And this is of course infinitely true, as in like it recurses infinitely. And this is why I said like for every property in like infinite depth for every data type, because you need to define this for like every conceivable data type. And yeah, non-trivial. Anyways, okay, so yeah, that's JavaScript, right? These are the issues with getters and setters in JavaScript. But I shouldn't say issues. I should say limitations, right? Because this is a limitation that's spawned by the existence of mutation. Like if you don't have mutation, you don't necessarily have the same kinds of problems, right? This scenario would probably be simpler because you wouldn't be able to change something. Yeah, okay, sorry. I mean, I'll move forwards because I'm realizing I'm getting long-minded here. But like, I can't remember who said this. Maybe somebody, if you remember, maybe shoot that in the comments. Somebody said something like that object-oriented programming is very strange because you're tangling up, like you are. I'm struggling for an English word here, but like pieces get so intermingled, like you have deep references between different things, right? So it's like I have a reference to the inner workings of another thing. It's like so like I am the program, but I have a program not just to the name of something, but to the first name or to the first property of the name of something, right? And you can go sort of infinitely deep into that. And then I actually have the capacity to change that inner thing inside of something else, right? And that's a very, like, if you think about it that way, as in like object-oriented programming is a lot like objects reaching deep into other objects and changing properties of these other objects, then suddenly like that just gives you the feeling like that's pretty strange. Like that's a pretty strange that's a metaphor to operate from, or analogy to operate from. This is a strange starting point, so and can easily cause problems. But anyways, okay. But in some sense, that's the sort of root cause of the problem that we're seeing now, or the limitation that we're seeing now. Anyways, okay, let's get back to Vue. Why am I talking about this? Well, what's totally cool in my mind, totally cool. Let's leave this file. Let's jump to main.js. Is that you can actually do this in Vue without, or I mean. You can actually, I mean, Vue has alleviated that problem for you. So if we have exactly the same scenario, what if we have a name property which has some first name, let's say John, we're just defaulting, and then actually let's say first is n/a, right, as in no name yet, and then last is also n/a, okay. And then let's update the template, so index.html, and so we're printing the message now, but let's also add a p tag here, and then let's just print name.first and name.last, right? Let's see if that works. Let's jump here over to the page again. Let me close the console there. So you can see we get NA and NA. So that's the first and that's the last, okay? And that's fine. But can we then change, right? So we have this set timeout. Let me rewrite this set timeout here. Let's just do this set timeout. And then we say app.message, update, or whatever. Let's just say updated. And then 2000 milliseconds, okay? So we can remove that, right? This still works, right? No errors. No, actually that was an error. What did I, app.message, oh sorry, of course, is equal to updated. Yeah, hello Vue is updated to updated. Okay, so let's change the name now. Let's say set timeout, and then let's say app.name. Let's just say name, right? First John, last, this is not gonna fit though. Let's compress this a bit. Does that help enough? Maybe compress here as well. Apologies for messy syntax. And then let's say 2000 here as well. Actually, maybe I can fit the spaces here. Whew, okay. Okay, and then let's refresh that. Well, we have errors. App.name is equal to this. Or last, yeah, sorry, the wrong, yeah, we're missing one. Okay, so syntax. So after 2000 milliseconds, we're updating the first name to John and the last name to Doe. Okay, so that seems to work fine, right? It's observing the whole thing, right? This is like in the example when we in temp.js here, right? When we did data.name equals, and that worked in JavaScript, like in plain JavaScript as well. So that was no surprise, let's say. But then this data.name.first, this didn't work in JavaScript. So let's try that in Vue. So let's go back to main.js and let's do another set timeout, right? We're gonna say set timeout. And then we're going to run the function, a function where we say app.name.first is equal to Jane. So we are not, let's actually do a different timestamp here. So let's say 1000 here, and then we have 2000, and then we have 3000. So we are not actually changing the whole value. We're not replacing the whole value. We're actually reaching into the insides of the name object and sort of changing it on its behalf. We're not, I mean, in some sense you could argue that we're sending a message to it and asking it to change, right? But the question is, when we are doing that, when we're mutating, like when we're sticking our hands into something and mutating it, is Vue actually able to still react to our change? So let's update this page and try it out. So we have hello Vue updated, John Doe, Jane Doe, right? Right? I mean, that's pretty cool. So watch this again, right? We start with this. We start with the first page. We go change hello Vue to updated. We change the NAs to John Doe, and then after a while we change to Jane Doe, right? Hello, John Doe, Jane Doe, right? So even though we're doing this app.name.first, we're sending that to Jane. And first I was like, whoa. That is so confusing. How can they actually manage to do that? But then I found, I would highly recommend this post. I'm not going to go through this whole post, but it's called Reactivity in Vue.js and its Pitfalls. Great Medium article, right? Where he talks about, like, you put it well, yeah, I mean pitfalls essentially, right? He's saying, well, the reactivity system is fantastic, but you have to be aware of the limitations again, or the pitfalls of that, because sometimes it doesn't work the way you think it works, and sometimes it does. But anyways, here from sort of skimming this, I learned that if you actually open up the console from this Vue page, and we start to look at the data, right? We have I mean, if we use the getters to get the value out, like we can say app.name, for example, right? And then we get the name out. But you have this observer here, right? So what we're getting out is actually, I mean, quite maybe expectedly, an object that has some more functions attached to it, or has some getters and setters attached to it. And as you can see here, you have getters and setters for first and for last. So maybe, wait, maybe I started this in the wrong end. What I should have done is I should have said, oh, wait, sorry, now I'm, how am I gonna make this show up on screen? I'm realizing my face is in the way. I'm just, okay, for the sake of simplicity, I'll figure this out some other time. I'm just going to flip it. Sorry about that. So, can I clear this also somehow? Clear. Yes, okay. So what I should have started by doing is I should have said maybe app. Do I get lots of stuff then? Yeah, unfortunately. Okay. No, but here we can see it, right? So if I just output app, if I look what app is, right, which is this Vue instance that we've defined, you can see that we have a getter for message and a setter for message. And we also have a getter for name and we have a setter for name. And that's unsurprising, right? Because they're using this getter-setter syntax or functionality in JavaScript. And this is how like this thing works. That's how we can manage to, or they can manage to react to us changing the whole name. But the cool part, right, is that if we get the thing that's behind name, I'm just wondering if we can get that from here from the console, but probably we can't. We have to actually ask for it, right? So if I don't ask for app, but I actually ask for name, right? So remember, app has getters and setters for name, but if I use the getter to get the name out, the name also has getters and setters for first and for last, right? And if you think about that, that's pretty smart, right? It's like what they are doing, like inevitably what they have to do is that when you construct this Vue instance, right? Let's now go back to the code here. When you construct this Vue instance and you pass in some data, they are traversing that data structure. They're traversing this object recursively down to the depths, or like down to the primitives, down to the strings or the numbers or whatever, and or functions, I guess. But and whenever you have more keys, right? Whenever you have an object, for example, or you have an array, they attach getters and setters to these different keys, so that they are able to react to also deep changes within the object, right? So it's like you can have like name.first and you can have a.b.c.d. and so forth. Like you can have depth in your objects, and they're going to be able to react to that because they've been able to set up a getter and a setter for that. So that's a totally smart idea, right? The issue with this is, of course, that if you think about that, that only works for the things that you pass into the Vue instance. I mean, it's like they have one chance of doing this, right? So if you add additional properties, that is not going to be reflected. Let me show you what I mean. If I say set timeout, we do another one here, and then we say app.name. Let's say initials is, let's say, JD, and I'll do that after 4,000 milliseconds, and then let's go to index.html and add that to the template. So let's say name.initials space, right, like that. Maybe that should be in parentheses. No, whatever. Okay, name. So we'll print the first name, the initials, and then the last name. So if I refresh the page now, right? Let me close the console also. I'll refresh the page. We still have all the old functionality, Jane Doe, but we don't get JD, right? And it's not like we have syntax errors. Let's go open up the console again, right? It's not like we have syntax errors. So, I mean, notice the speed of the change. It's 1, 2, 3, where's 4? Right? There's no fourth change. So this happens because we didn't specify the existence of the property initials when we instantiated Vue, right? Or the Vue. So if I had here in the data property of the options object that's being passed to the Vue as we instantiate it, if I there would have specified that some default initials, then they actually would have been able to construct a getter and a setter, and then we should be able to, or they should be able to react to it. So let's try that out, right? We've specified some base initials, and I've just used empty string now. And now you can see, okay, updated John Doe, Jane Doe. Ooh, it didn't work. Wait. Name, initials, initials. Did I misspell it? Wait, wrong place. Index, name dot initials. Let's save that. Let's go to main, initials, save. Wait, let's refresh again. Did I forget to save something? Jane Doe. No update. App.name.initials. Wait, what am I doing wrong here? 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Initials. App.name.initials. Index.html. Name. Wait. I am a bit confused now. No, wait. There is some kind of... No. We do have NA here. But then suddenly we have empty string. Oh, my bad. Okay, sorry. So, yeah, dynamic languages. Sometimes. So the reason this doesn't work is, of course, that I'm removing probably, I guess, I'm probably removing the observable by saying that name fundamentally equals something else. Yeah, it has to be something like that. I mean, if I don't do this, right? Let's think about that. Well, let's just try that, right? Update, then we should get Jane directly. Yeah, and then we get JD, right? So I guess, yeah, another culprit. So if you fundamentally change the structure of the thing, then you might lose observables. You might lose observables. So that's, I mean, we have to be a bit careful about that as well. So okay. So in that case, wait, let's just to emphasize that what I said before was correct, just to see if that I'm not crazy, right? If we didn't have the default initials, so there's no chance for Vue to be able to set up observables, now we shouldn't get JD. If I refresh and we check this out, we get Jane, but we don't get JD. Okay, so that was a more proper example of that not working, right? So in the absence of a property specified upon creation of a Vue instance, then Vue has no way of setting up observers, which means, or setting up an observable and observers, which means that Vue, your template won't react to changes to that property. So in other words, if you make up new properties in your JavaScript that aren't initially specified, then those can't be observed. Now, of course, that's not entirely true, because if you read this article, there's a bunch of more detail, and there's actually a function called, where's that? Vue dot, probably set. Let's search for it. Yeah, vue.set. So if you don't want to create a new object, you can use vue.set to set a new object property. This method ensures that the property is created as a reactive property and triggers Vue updates. So yeah, I mean, actually, let's try that since we are in that scenario, right? So, or actually, we've moved ourselves away from that scenario, but let's remove the initials from the beginning there. And then let's say, then we can actually reintroduce this John Doe stuff. And then instead of setting the initials like this, we need to say, let's copy this line. What are we doing? We need to say something like this. Vue.set. Wait, can I, what was there? Item, this.cart.find by, okay, so then you actually pick something out. So you take app.name app.name, and then we pass the name of the key that we want to set, which is initials, and then we pass the value, which is JD, and then that's that. We remove the last line that we had before, the old way of doing it, which isn't observed, and then let's try that out. Can we actually get that out? Hello Vue, updated, John Doe, Jane Doe, Jane JD Doe. Okay, so you can use Vue set. You can use Vue set to force Vue to observe something which it wouldn't otherwise observe. However, I mean, I am obviously learning Vue as we go along here, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But what I would spontaneously think is that it would make sense to make sure that Vue knows all your properties from the beginning. I would assume, right? I would assume that if you're carefully thinking about your data structures, much like you have to carefully think about the structure of the store in a Redux application or in a React application, and if you do carefully think about it, it works very well, right? So I would assume it's the same thing here. Like, you have to carefully think about how to craft your data object. And if you do that, you should probably be able to get away without having to resort to these like vue.set calls. But again, I'm assuming, right? But again, check out this blog post. They have it's pretty interesting, super short. And here he also mentions that arrays are, as we talked about, right? Like, arrays can't natively be observed, but Vue can observe arrays if you do push, however, or pop or something like this, or splice. He's emphasizing here. or sorry, I shouldn't say he, this person is emphasizing, and then, but he's, this person is emphasizing, oof, I tried to zoom in and then now it's, okay, so here. So this person is emphasizing also that when you set something directly at an index, right? When you say my array, and then you say at index 4 I want to set this particular value, that thing Vue can't detect, right? And presumably that's because of technical limitations, or rather like maybe it can't technically be implemented in JavaScript, because otherwise, I mean, they probably should do it. But anyways, that's maybe okay. So pause a moment for reflection, right? The question, I guess, is then whether. So I like how Sandy Metz has a lot of great talks on object-oriented programming, and she tends to very often say that object-oriented programming is about sending messages to objects, and then this doesn't really look like we're sending a message to an object. Like this syntax where we have this bracket syntax where we're saying set the item at index 0 to this particular value, but actually that could be constructed as a message, or in a sort of message syntax where it's like what we say, well, my array dot set at, and then you pass 0 and then you pass your value, right? Like that would be a more, let's think about it, object-oriented way of thinking about it. And then you could just, like, if you're constructing a language, and then you would say, well, this bracket syntax is just syntactic sugar, right? It's just another syntax that sort of we use because it's convenient, like it's just syntactical, but actually what happens is that a message is sent. So I think, don't quote me on this, right? But I think that's the way it works in Ruby. So a lot of things in Ruby are actually just syntactic sugar, but you can probably still override the method that sets a value at a particular index. And I think actually like that's a very good thing in a dynamically typed object-oriented language, because everything should be a message, right? The less special syntax, or if we can have less special syntax, that's good. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I can't remember exactly which talk, but do check out Sandy Metz on YouTube. Tons of great talks by her. But yeah, so anyways, if JavaScript would, so this like, okay, this problem of not being able to observe the fact that we've changed the value at a particular index indicates that probably in JavaScript this is not a like a function that's overridable, overloadable. Always confuses me. It's not something that we can change, like we can inherit from and re-implement, right? But rather it's some kind of special syntax. And that's unfortunate, because if it wasn't special syntax, but rather if it was just syntactic sugar around a normal method call, then solving this problem would be fairly trivial, because then solving this problem would, for the Vue guys or for the people who constructed Vue, it would be as trivial, quotation marks, trivial as the things that they've done now, right? As trivial as making sure that push now, because then there they probably override those methods, right? They override push and call all the observables, or call all the observers after they've also actually pushed the data, after they've also called a native push method. But yeah, so that would then that would be possible. But anyways, I don't know. And maybe it is possible. If you do know that it's possible, do shoot something in the comments. I'd be very interested to see more about that. So anyways, I think this wraps up for today. So now we've talked a lot more about the reactivity system and the sort of what you can do and what you can't do, or rather, I mean, you can do anything, but what Vue can react to and what Vue can't react to. So there are some things that it can't react to, and again, I think probably we should try to stick to the things that it can react to, and then have very good reasons if we deviate from that. Because if we deviate from that, it should probably indicate that we have a possibility to, or there's the possibility to rethink our design so that we don't have to resort to things that could potentially introduce bugs, right? Like, just think about this, like, you have to call view.set when you change this particular property, or when you set this property for the first time. Like, you may know that when you first did that, But then like your colleague or the next person who looks at this particular piece of code might not know that and like think, well, why would you do view.set here? That's silly, and then just remove it, right? And then we have a bug that's maybe tricky to dig out. Anyways, okay. Let's wrap up here. That's the reactivity system, and then next time we will actually get into conditionals and loops. Thanks a ton for watching. Remember to subscribe so that you won't miss the upcoming Vue videos and other videos. Hit the like button if you appreciate it, and give me a comment if you think there is something that's that needs improvement in these videos that you don't appreciate. Anyways, glad to have you along, and I will see you in the next one.